to bring the charger inside.
Well, it's too late now. The video started.
Gosh.
I just thought about that after that. Usually, like, your mother's here and she can play it, but
Gosh.
So, anyways, we're live. Good morning. Welcome back to Sunday School. Speaking of bumper music, I got an email from Twitch that they've changed their policy now with copyrighted music. So if their AI detects any little bit of copyrighted music, they'll delete your video.
That's literally how
They'll take it out of publication, and which, unfortunately for the Twitch folks, I don't have my other phone this morning, so this is not going out on Twitch, and I might do something later just to make up for that. But Twitch is one of those weird things, and I still don't really fully. I mean, every time I check my videos, I have up to 4 views, maybe 5. And they're for over a whole 2-week period. So, I mean, there's people watching it, but they're not following me. They're not. So I have no idea who these people are, which is fine as long as somebody is watching it and getting something out of it. But I don't know how long I'll stick with Twitch. But yeah, it's kind of the same thing with Facebook. And Facebook will... It's like how we have to edit our videos from our church services. We can't include any of the song service because if we're playing a recorded, if we're playing it on our own instruments, that's one thing. If somebody's singing it, that's you can do that. But if you're playing it directly off of an audio file or a CD or something, old days cassettes, Facebook will claim that's copyrighted stuff, and they'll 8-track tapes. That was my dream. When I had my El Camino in high school, was to have an 8-track player in my El Camino.
That sounds fun.
That would have been just like the ultimate thing for me in the mid-90s. Yeah. Anyway, so and it's funny, I just started to kind of just throw in that little bit of music to fill that gap from when the videos start. I've got friends that do regular podcasts, and they had to come up with something because you have this like sometimes 10-second gap between when you can actually start, when all the different streaming services you're using line up and everything gets fully going. And so they would play.
A lot of streamers have a pre-recorded or like a pre-animated thing, and it's like one of those counting down things. It's like starting in.
Yeah, the countdown timers. And you can get that kind of stuff, but I'm doing this on the fly off my phone. So, unless I went to like TikTok or something, which I really don't want to do. I don't want to do TikTok. The Chinese are bad enough. I don't know though. They need.
So you're being racist now?
No, I'm not being racist against Chinese people. I like them. It's just the country of China owns TikTok, and TikTok
so
invades your privacy.
You're being contentist?
Yeah.
How dare you?
This is my daughter.
How dare you?
This is my daughter, 14 years old.
The best.
Explains so much. But yeah, no, I mean, TikTok has a lot of stuff in there that you can actually use. You can overlay background images. You can superimpose like your video over a screenshot of a news something or whatever. And so it's appealing as far as what their technology can do. I don't know. Anyways, Sunday school, going through the biblical feasts, ordained by God in Leviticus chapter 23. And we've done we did Passover. All right, remember that Passover from Exodus when they're about to come out of Egypt. Then we talked about the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which starts the day after Passover. Then we talked about Purim, Purim, which comes out of the book of Esther.
11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5.
Okay. That's enough. No idea what you're doing there. Anyways, so now we're going to talk about the Feast of First Fruits. Now, again, like I said, the Passover was the whole thing with putting the blood on the doorpost so the death angel, when he went through Egypt, would not kill the firstborn of Israel. Then, of course, the Israelites ran out of Egypt in a hurry, and they didn't have time to actually bake bread. They didn't have time for the yeast, the leaven to work, because it has to rise 2 or 3 times before you're able to actually cook the bread, which is the whole Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is a week-long ceremony. So Passover is on... So unleavened bread starts on a Sabbath day, which is Saturday. Passover actually happens on Friday. And then, so like I said, unleavened bread goes for a week, and the day after the Feast of Unleavened Bread begins, you now have the Feast of First Fruits, which is the timing of all this. When you look at this, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Leviticus 23, chapter 23, verse 10. Speak to the Israelites and tell them, when you enter the land I am giving you, and you reap its harvest, you are to bring the first sheaf of your harvest to the priest. Sheaf, yeah, it was like a tray. Sheaf, no, SHEAF. It was like this kind of a big tray thing, and you would pile up your barley stalks and your wheat stalks on the sheaf, and you would take that to the winnowing floor, where you would separate the grains out from the husks and the grass and all that kind of jazz. So, so verses 10 through 14 give you the explanation of what all's supposed to go on. And there's burnt offerings. There's burnt offering of bread and burnt offering of a 1-year-old male lamb, unblemished, untouched. And let's see here. Yeah, so you take the first sheaf of the harvest to the priest, and the priest would offer it up to God. And this is, you're looking at this, but one of the things that the Levitical priests would do is what they called a heave offering. So they would heave it up to God. They would make this motion, the symbolic motion. They would take the grain or whatever it is. They would heave it up to God, and they would do this so many times. And it actually kind of gets into that. Verse 11, he will present the sheaf before the Lord so that you may be accepted. The priest is to present it on the day after the Sabbath. So that was one of the ways that you do the heave offering, right? They would, they were trying to reach up to God and hand it to God. So, but first fruits, and a lot of times this gets associated with tithing, modern day kind of stuff. They want you to, everybody who wants you to tithe will get out there and tell you that, good morning. We'll tell you that, whatever you get of your first fruits, you need to give back to God. And this is where that comes from. And if you go into Joshua and read, and this is what's interesting. So this is Leviticus. This is written before they entered into the land of Canaan. So Moses, before he passed away, actually had him write down Genesis, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. A lot of this was written before they entered into Canaan, before Moses passed away. So the books of the law, the history of the law up to that point. And Leviticus was a book of the law, and it was written before they entered into the land of Canaan. So this is actually, it's prophetic. It's foreshadowing when you enter into the land which I am about to give you, which I am giving you. So God had prepared the way for the Israelites to finally enter into the land of Canaan, the promised land, excuse me. And he had gone ahead and prepared the peoples to basically run in fear or to be easily defeated, provided they did things exactly how God instructed them to do things. And a lot of those towns they went into, these people left, and they left everything behind, or they were killed. And now the Israelites, they didn't have to work for food. They didn't have to build houses. They just moved in where these people had left, or, were no longer alive. And so in order to say thank you to God, the Feast of First Fruits, it's right there in verse 10. When you enter the land I'm giving you and you reap its harvest. So they didn't have to work for it. God provided everything that they needed, and he provided everything for them. Food, and in some cases he told them to destroy everything, and they didn't stay there. They just, the people, the animals, the heart, whatever was planted, the vineyards, the crops, and all that. Sometimes he told them to destroy all those things and leave nothing behind. But most of the time, he allowed the Israelites to go in and take whatever they needed, at least as far as feeding themselves, right? So they've been wandering around the desert for 40 years. He instructed them to have the unleavened bread, so that they would be able to eat for however many days, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, until God started to rain manna down from heaven to provide. Okay, you're shaking my phone. Stop it. Makes the image all blurry.
There's little guys behind you.
So what?
Little guys behind you.
Yeah, people.
The little guys.
Little peoples.
And there's a tinier guy right there.
Yeah, there's people walking through the grove of
How dare they?
flowery, fancy-looking trees here.
How dare they? That's your background.
They're part of the background. They came with the picture.
How dare they?
I'm not going to be peopleist and blot them out. Anyways, so, in going through this, and I like to look at different translations, when I look at Young's literal translation, it actually says in verse 14, this is kind of part of the restrictions of what's supposed to happen during the Feast of First Fruits. So according to the Christian Standard Bible, verse 14, you must not eat bread, roasted grain, or any new grain until this very day, and until you have brought the offering to your God. This is to be a permanent statute throughout your generations and all your dwellings. Now, Young's literal translation says you must not eat bread and roasted corn and full ears. But as I look through all the information I can look through from Jews and from Messianic Jews and other Christians and stuff and scholars, the first harvest around this time of year is barley. Barley is the first thing planted in the earliest of spring. And if you plant it at the right time, you miss the freeze and you're able to actually get a good crop. And of course, you can make all kinds of stuff from barley, not just beer, but you can make barley flour and make barley bread. And that's when you talk to a Jew, they're not going to say anything about corn. They're going to talk about barley. And like I said, I looked that up, and when you plant barley, and again, it's in the earliest of spring. It takes 90 days before it's a grass type grain, and it's 90 days before it's ready for harvest. So it's actually kind of a quick thing. You can plant, and within 3 months, you can harvest it, and you can start making flour and bread and do the stuff you need to do to survive. So it's, as far as crops go, it grows reasonably fast. But that's what's going on early spring. So timing-wise, like I mentioned earlier, all right, the Passover happens on average on the 14th day of the first month of the Jewish calendar. So then the Feast of Unleavened Bread begins on the 15th day of the first month. And then the Feast of First Fruits happens on the 16th day. So Passover happens. The next day begins the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, you have the Feast of First Fruits, which is the next day, the second day into it. And when you actually look at this, because when you start reading the Messianic study guides and stuff and explanations for all these feasts, because they do recognize Christ as their Messiah and Savior, Christ is the first fruits of the work that God did through him, the first resurrection. That's kind of the significance. And even way back here in Leviticus, 4,000 years ago, when God gave these instructions to the Israelites, God exists outside of space and time. He can look down on us in our time and our life from beginning to end. He can see the whole universe from start to finish. He's sitting up there like he's watching a DVD or a VHS, and he's winding and rewinding the tape going back and forth, and he can look at everything. So when he's talking about stuff here in Leviticus, he just looks over a little bit and goes, "Oh, there's my son Christ, and there's the fulfillment of what I was preparing them for way back here in Leviticus." So, for us as Christians, the Feast of First Fruits is Resurrection Day, which we call Easter. And so all of this points towards God. All of this, the whole point of these feasts is to recognize and acknowledge God caring for his children, his followers, his believers. Again, like I said, Passover commemorating God's deliverance of the Israelites out of Egypt and away from sin. Unleavened bread was acknowledging his providing the stuff we need to live to his children in the wilderness. It wasn't just one of those. When Abraham was called up and he left his home, and when he left the Ur of the Chaldeans, he didn't know he didn't know what was going to happen, but God provided for him the whole entire way. God just said, "Get up and go." Cool. Okay, like people here are like, they can't understand what you're saying. This is live. So apparently, my daughter in a history class at her school has been learning about the Chaldeans.
Recently we've been learning about Chinese people.
And so it just ties in with where Abraham came from. But anyways, when God told Abraham to get up and go, he got up and went. He took as I've said before, he took the leap of faith, so that all we have to do is take a step of faith, because we see that God provided for Abraham. And of course, as you study through the genealogies and you go all the way through, and you have Joseph in Egypt and all these things going on where God had provided for and kept his, Abraham's seed alive, his bloodline alive, and so here they are, they've left Egypt, where they really stayed too long, and they were getting too accustomed to the sin, and they were, starting to turn away from God. So, they got to a point where they were like, "Oh, this is more than we can handle. God, please help us." And so God takes them out of Egypt. And of course, they wandered around the desert for 40 years complaining, despite the fact that he gave them food, water, their clothes didn't wear out. God took care of them. And so when we get into studying these feasts, that's the whole point, is acknowledging and recognizing that God cares for his people, his children. All things work together for the glory of God, for good, for those who love God and those who are called according to his purpose, paraphrasing there. But you get the point. So, if we trust in God, He's faithful to care for us. He is faithful to provide us for our needs. Not so much our wants all the time, but definitely our needs. Food, water, shelter, the stuff we've got to have to live, God's going to provide for us. And all we have to do is trust Him. And that's what the first fruits is about, is trusting Him. So here, the first harvest that they get into in this land of Canaan that they didn't have to really even fight for. If they did, it was minimal effort because God had already prepared the way. And this is foreshadowing, prophetically speaking, about Christ. And Christ is the first to be resurrected from the dead. And then, when he finally ascended after he hung around on earth for 40 days and taught the disciples some more, when he ascended, he took all of the people from the good side of Sheol with him to heaven. So, it's all of this is leading up to Christ, is showing God's goodness, and we will be able to partake of that goodness provided we believe in Him, we trust Him, and we rely on Him to feed us spiritually as well as physically. But yeah, this lines right up there with our Easter celebration, so to speak. And they Catholics and all them call it Holy Week, that's the week that Christ enters into, and we're actually going to start that very soon, because it is April 3rd. So, hey, there's breakfast.
What cookies along here? Yours is in the thing. I thought you were in Kim's class. Sorry.
In the what?
Miss Kim's class. It's in the kitchen. Ordered it.
Okay.
The ladies did an Annie Armstrong pancake breakfast this morning, sold plates.
Sweltering.
No, it's not.
The heater hasn't even kicked on. What are you talking about?
She's on syrup.
But they ran a little late doing that pancake breakfast thing this morning. So
Gosh.
yeah. So this lines right up with Easter for us, Resurrection Day, and the first fruit of resurrection was Christ. So that is that. The next thing we'll get into next week is Feast of Pentecost, which lines up with some other things as well. So we'll be looking forward to that. I appreciate you watching. God bless, and we'll see you next time.